It was a quiet night in a small neighborhood. Most houses had their lights turned off, and only the soft hum of crickets filled the air. Inside one modest little house, a single father sat on the edge of his son's bed, reading him a short story before sleep. The boy's eyelids were already heavy, his small hand holding onto his father's shirt like he always did when he felt safe. The father smiled, brushing his son's hair gently. "Good night, champ," he whispered. The boy mumbled something sleepy and turned over, hugging his pillow tight. The father turned off the lamp and quietly stepped into the living room. He picked up a few toys scattered on the floor, sighed softly, and looked around. It wasn't a big house, but it was clean, warm, and peaceful, something he worked hard to keep that way. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of tea, and leaned against the counter. The house was finally quiet. He thought about the week ahead, work, school, bills. It was just another normal night. Until the knock came. It wasn't a soft knock either. It was quick, shaky, almost desperate. He frowned, checking the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. No one visited at this hour. He hesitated for a moment, thinking it might just be the wind or maybe some kids playing a prank. But then, the knocking came again, faster this time. He put down his cup and walked to the door, his heart beating a little faster. When he opened it, what he saw froze him for a moment. Two little girls stood outside. They were identical twins, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing thin pajamas that looked too small for the cold night. Their hair was messy and their faces were streaked with tears. One of them held the other's hand tightly, as if afraid she'd disappear if she let go. The father blinked, unsure what to say. "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay?" he asked gently. The smaller girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "They hurt our mama. Please help." The words hit him like a wave. He immediately crouched down to their level. Hey, it's all right. Come inside, okay? You're safe here." He led them into the warm house, closing the door behind them. The girls hesitated at first, but once they felt the heat from inside, they followed quietly. He grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around their small shoulders. Their little bodies were trembling from the cold. "Here, sit down," he said softly, guiding them to the sofa. "Do you want some warm milk?" Both nodded quickly, eyes still darting around the room as if they were afraid someone might come after them. The father hurried to the kitchen, his hands slightly shaking as he warmed the milk. He couldn't stop thinking about what they had said. They hurt our mama. Who were they talking about? What had happened? When he returned, the girls were sitting side by side, holding each other's hands tightly. He gave them each a mug and sat down across from them. "There you go," he said with a small smile. "Can you tell me your names?" The older twin, or maybe she was just a little taller, looked at him cautiously before saying, "I'm Lily, and this is my sister Lucy." He nodded. "Hi Lily, hi Lucy, He paused, realizing names didn't matter right now. "It's okay. You can just call me Uncle if you like. Now tell me, what happened to your mama?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears again. She wiped them with her sleeve before whispering, "A bad man came. He was shouting. Mama told us to hide. We ran outside and then we heard her crying." Lily's lip quivered and she added, "We waited, but she didn't come out. So we came here. We saw your light." The father felt his stomach twist. The house next door had been quiet for weeks. He didn't even realize a woman with kids lived there now. He took a slow breath. He didn't want to scare the girls more, but he also couldn't just sit here doing nothing. "Okay," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm. "You both did the right thing by coming here. You're very brave. But now we need to help your mama, all right?" Both girls nodded. He grabbed his phone and checked outside through the window. The street was still and empty, a faint fog covering the sidewalks. "Can you show me where you live?" he asked. Lily pointed toward the end of the street. "There," she said quietly. "The small house with the broken fence," he nodded. "Okay, here's what we'll do. I'll go check, but you two will stay here where it's safe. My son is sleeping in the next room. I'll lock the door and come right back, okay?" But the twins immediately shook their heads, fear flashing in their eyes. "No, we want to come. We don't want to stay here alone," Lucy cried, clutching his arm. He looked at their faces, pale, frightened, trembling. He couldn't say no to them. "All right," he said gently. "Then you'll come with me, but you'll stay close. Promise?" Both nodded. He quickly put on his jacket, slipped on his boots, and grabbed a flashlight. He tucked another blanket around his sleeping son, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'll be right back, buddy." Then he quietly led the twins outside. The night air was colder now. The streetlights flickered as they walked. The girls held his hands tightly, their small fingers cold against his skin. When they reached the house with the broken fence, the father stopped. The place looked run down. The front gate hung loosely and one of the windows was half open. From inside, everything looked still, but there was something in the air, a kind of heavy silence that didn't feel right. He stepped closer. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the twins. They clung to each other, wide-eyed. He knocked on the door. "Hello, is anyone there?" he called out. No response. He tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then he thought he heard something faint, a sound like a moan or a whisper. He couldn't be sure, but it was enough. He reached for his phone and called for help. "Hi, yes, this is urgent," he said quietly. "Two little girls came to my house. Their mother might be hurt. I think she's inside her home. Please send someone quickly." The operator assured him help was on the way. He ended the call and looked down at the girls. "They're coming, okay? You did so well." A few minutes later, the faint sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. The twins finally relaxed a little, holding each other. When the police arrived, the father quickly explained what had happened. They entered the house carefully while he stayed outside with the girls, keeping them close so they wouldn't see or hear anything that could scare them more. After what felt like forever, an officer came out, his face serious but calm. "We found her," he said softly. "She's alive, just hurt and scared. We're taking her to the hospital." The girls gasped and started crying, but this time it was a cry of relief. They hugged each other tightly, whispering their mama's name. The father's eyes softened as he watched them. He felt his chest tighten, a mix of sadness, relief, and something else he couldn't describe. The officer spoke gently with him, thanking him for his quick call and asking him to stay until things settled. He nodded, still holding the twins close. They wouldn't let go of his hand. Soon an ambulance arrived. The paramedics brought out their mother on a stretcher, pale but conscious. When she saw her daughters waiting, her weak smile broke into tears. She reached out a trembling hand. The twins ran forward, calling out, "Mama!" and hugged her as best they could before the medics gently guided them back. The mother whispered something softly, a thank you, looking at the single dad with tired eyes full of gratitude. He just nodded quietly, his throat tight. When the ambulance left, the street grew silent again. Neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves, some curious, some worried. But the father didn't care. He only cared that the girls were safe now. He knelt down beside them. "You're both very brave," he said, wiping their tears gently. "Your mama's going to be okay now. She's getting help." They looked up at him, eyes filled with trust and exhaustion. "Can we stay with you?" Lucy whispered softly. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course you can. Let's get you somewhere warm again." He led them back to his home, this time walking slower, making sure they felt safe. When they stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a soft blanket. He gave them a little snack and made a small bed for them on the couch. The girls lay down together, holding hands even as their eyes began to close. "Thank you," one murmured sleepily. He smiled faintly, sitting nearby as they drifted off. He looked at them, then at his own sleeping son in the other room. For a long time, he didn't move. The night that had started so quietly had turned into something he'd never forget. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what would happen with the twins' mother, or how this story would unfold. But one thing was certain. Something inside him had changed that night. Sometimes, life doesn't warn you before giving you a test. Sometimes it just knocks on your door, or in his case, two little girls did. And everything changes from that moment on. The morning after that long, tense night came slowly. The sunlight crept through the small curtains, warming the living room where the twin girls still slept curled up together under a blanket. The single dad stood quietly near the window, sipping a cup of tea, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He looked at the twins again. They looked peaceful now, though their small faces still showed signs of tiredness and fear. He wondered what kind of life they had before that night. He didn't know their full story yet, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just let them go without making sure they were truly safe. His son, still half asleep, walked into the living room, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, who are they?" he whispered softly. He crouched down and smiled. "They're friends who needed help last night. Let them rest a bit, okay? We'll talk later." The boy nodded, yawning. "Okay." The father turned back toward the window. His mind kept going back to the look on the twins' faces when they said, "They hurt our mama." The fear in their eyes wasn't something a child should ever have to feel. He took a deep breath and made a silent promise to himself. He'd make sure they never had to feel that way again. When the twins finally woke up, the first thing they did was sit up fast as if afraid they might still be in danger, but when they saw him smiling gently from the kitchen, they relaxed. "Good morning," he said kindly. "I made breakfast. You both must be hungry." They looked at each other, then at the warm food on the table, toast, eggs, and milk. They hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to eat. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "You don't need to ask." They started eating slowly at first, then a little faster once they realized no one was going to stop them. Watching them made something ache inside his chest. They weren't just hungry for food, they were hungry for safety, for peace. After breakfast, he sat down beside them. "Do you remember your mama's full name?" he asked softly. "I want to make sure the hospital knows you're okay." Lily nodded. "Yes, the police took her last night, right?" He smiled. "Yes, the police took her to the hospital so doctors could help her. I just want to check how she's doing." Lucy looked up at him with wide eyes.
"Can we see her?"
He hesitated. "Not yet, maybe later today. The doctors need to make sure she feels better first. But I'll find out for you, okay?" The girls nodded silently. He took out his phone and called the local police station. He explained who he was and what had happened. The officer on the line recognized his name from the report and told him the mother was stable and would be able to see her daughters soon. Relief washed over him. When he shared the good news, both girls' faces lit up. "She's okay?" they asked together. "She's okay," he confirmed with a smile, "and she'll be very happy to know you're safe." That small moment of joy filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The twins hugged each other, whispering their mama's name over and over. Later, after making sure his son was set for school, the father took the twins outside for a short walk. The morning air was cool and gentle, and the neighborhood felt different, quieter, like it was holding its breath after what had happened the night before. As they walked, the girls started opening up a little. They told him about their small home, about how their mother used to read them bedtime stories and how she worked long hours cleaning offices. They didn't mention much about the man who hurt her, and he didn't ask. He didn't need the details. He could already imagine the fear they must have lived through. When they reached the corner of the street, Lucy suddenly stopped and looked up at him. "You came when we knocked," she said softly. He smiled. "Of course I did." She frowned as if trying to understand. "But other houses had lights too. We knocked before. No one opened." He felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say for a moment. Then he crouched down so he was at their eye level. "Sometimes people are scared," he said gently. "They don't always know when someone really needs help. But that's over now, okay? You're safe." Both girls nodded quietly. They didn't say anything else, but their eyes said enough. When they came back home, a social worker was waiting outside the house. She introduced herself politely and explained that she had been sent to check on the girls. She thanked the father for taking care of them and said she'd like to talk for a few minutes. Inside, she sat with the twins, speaking softly, asking about their mama, school, and friends. The father stayed nearby, pretending to tidy up but really just listening, making sure the girls didn't feel alone. After a while, the social worker stood up and smiled at him. "You've done a very kind thing," she said. "Their mother is asking for them at the hospital. Would you be willing to take them there?" He nodded immediately. Of course. The drive to the hospital was quiet at first. The twins stared out the window holding hands. Every so often, one of them would ask, "Are we almost there?" He'd smile and say, "Almost." When they finally arrived, the nurse guided them to a small room. The twins ran forward the moment they saw their mother lying on the bed. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she reached for them. She looked weak but alive, her face softening the instant her daughters were in her arms. The father stood back, watching quietly. The reunion was tender and raw, the kind of moment that didn't need words. After a few minutes, the mother looked up at him. "You're the one who helped them, aren't you?" she said, her voice shaky but warm. He nodded slightly. They came to my door. I just did what anyone would do. She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. No, not everyone would have opened that door. He didn't know how to respond. He simply smiled and said, "You focus on getting better. They're safe now." The twins refused to leave her side for a long time, and he didn't rush them. He just stood by the door, quietly observing the little family, broken but still holding together. Later, as they were leaving, the mother reached out again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't just help them. You saved us." He nodded, his heart heavy but calm. "Take care of yourself. I'll check in again tomorrow." On the way home, the twins were quiet again, but this time it was a calm kind of silence. They were no longer afraid, and they were just tired. When they got home, his son greeted them happily, asking if their mama was okay. They nodded, and soon the three kids were sitting together on the floor, coloring with crayons. Watching them, the father couldn't help but smile. The sound of laughter slowly filled the room, something his house hadn't heard in a long time. As evening came, the twins got ready for bed. They brushed their teeth, folded their little blankets neatly, and thanked him politely like they'd been raised to be good girls. Before falling asleep, Lily looked at him from the couch and said softly, "Can we stay here until Mama gets better?" He nodded. "Of course. You can stay as long as you need," she smiled sleepily. "You're like a hero." He laughed softly. "No, I'm just a dad who opened a door." But later that night, as he sat alone at the kitchen table, those words stayed with him. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who just followed his heart. Yet he also knew this wasn't over. There was still so much the twins and their mother had to go through, rebuilding, healing, finding peace again. He thought about how life could change in just one moment. One knock, one decision. Before going to bed, he checked on all three children one more time. His son was fast asleep, and the twins were curled up together, holding hands even in their dreams. He quietly covered them with the blanket again. Standing there in the dim light, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The kind that comes not from grand plans, but from doing the right thing when no one else will. He looked around the small living room at the soft glow of the lamp, the faint hum of the night outside, and whispered to himself, maybe this is what being a father really means. He didn't know that in the days to come. This moment would grow into something much bigger, a bond that none of them would ever forget, and a story that would change not just their lives, but the hearts of everyone who heard it. That night, for the first time in years, he slept deeply, not because everything was perfect, but because for once he knew he had made a difference. The next morning began with a faint golden light slipping through the window. The single dad woke up earlier than usual. For a moment, he sat quietly on the edge of his bed, listening to the soft sounds of breathing coming from the living room. The twins were still asleep, wrapped in their blankets, while his son was snoring softly on the other side of the room. He rubbed his face and sighed, thinking about the long day ahead. Even though the girl's mother was safe now, he knew there was still so much to figure out. What would happen next? Where would they go? Would the hospital let the girls see their mother again soon? He made some breakfast, warm oatmeal and fruit, and the smell slowly filled the small house. When the twins woke up, they looked around sleepily, and then both smiled when they saw him standing near the stove. "Good morning," he said kindly. "You both slept well?" They nodded. Lucy rubbed her eyes and said, "I dreamed about Mama." She was smiling. He smiled back. "That's a good dream. Maybe today you'll see her again." After breakfast, he helped his son get ready for school, reminding him to be polite and focused. The boy gave the twins a cheerful wave before leaving, and they waved back shyly. When the house was quiet again, the twins sat on the couch, drawing on scraps of paper he had given them. He watched as they made pictures of flowers, clouds, and a small house with three people standing in front, a mother and two little girls holding hands. It made his heart ache and warm at the same time. A few hours later, his phone rang. It was the social worker again. She told him the twins' mother was awake and feeling stronger. The doctor said she could see her daughters for a short visit. The girls' faces lit up when he told them. They jumped up and hugged each other tightly. "We can see Mama?" Lily asked in disbelief. "Yes," he said, smiling. "Let's go see her." The drive to the hospital was quiet, but the energy inside the car was full of hope. The twins looked out the window, pointing at every flower and bird they saw as if the world suddenly seemed brighter again. When they reached the hospital, the nurse led them down a clean, white hallway. The girls held his hands tightly as they walked, their small footsteps echoing softly. When they reached the room, the door was already half open. Inside, their mother was sitting up, her face pale but her smile wide when she saw them. "Mama!" The twins cried together and ran into her arms. The moment they touched, it was like the room filled with light. The mother held them close, tears running down her cheeks. "My babies," she whispered over and over. The father stood quietly near the door, not wanting to intrude on their moment. The nurse looked at him and smiled softly as if to say, "You did a good thing." After a few minutes, the mother looked up and motioned for him to come closer. "Please," she said, "come in." He stepped forward slowly. The twins still clung to their mother's arms, their little faces pressed against her. "I don't know how to thank you," the mother said, her voice weak but filled with emotion. "If you hadn't opened that door, I don't even want to think what could have happened." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." She smiled faintly. "No, not anyone. I knocked on a few doors before. Nobody answered. You did." Those words stayed with him. He didn't know what to say, so he just smiled and said softly, "I'm glad you're safe." The girls spent some time talking and drawing for their mother. They told her about sleeping at his house, about the breakfast, and how his son shared his crayons with them. Their innocent excitement made everyone in the room smile. The mother listened, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. She looked at the father again and said quietly, "You've done more than help. You've given them kindness at a time they needed it most." He shrugged gently. "Sometimes all we need is a little kindness." When the visit ended, the nurse told them the mother would need to stay a few more days for recovery. The twins looked disappointed, but she promised them she'd be home soon. On the way back, they were quiet again, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was calm. They were no longer afraid. They were thinking about the future. That evening, as the sun began to set, the twins sat on the porch with him while his son played in the yard. The sky was painted in orange and pink, and for a while no one spoke. It was peaceful. Lucy suddenly looked up and said, "When Mama comes home, can we still visit you?" He chuckled softly. "Of course you can. You'll always be welcome here." The girls smiled widely. They liked his house. It felt safe, warm, and full of gentle voices. Later that night, after putting his son to bed, he found the twins sitting quietly near the window, looking out at the moon. "You should sleep now," he said softly. "Big day tomorrow." Lily turned to him. "We were just saying thank you to the moon," she said seriously. He tilted his head. "The moon?" She nodded. "Because it helped us find your house that night. We saw the light from your window under the moonlight." He smiled at that. "Then I guess the moon did a good job." They giggled and went to bed. That night, after cleaning up, he sat for a long time in the quiet house. His thoughts were full. Of the girls, their mother, the way fate sometimes connects strangers in the most unexpected ways. He remembered how lonely he'd been since losing his wife years ago. He had spent so long just trying to manage life, raise his boy, and survive one day at a time. But these past few days had reminded him of something. Compassion didn't just heal others, it healed you too. The next few days passed with visits to the hospital, school routines, and small moments of laughter. The twins became more open and playful. They started drawing little hearts on sticky notes and leaving them around his house. One morning he found one on the fridge that said, "Thank you for helping our mama." He smiled so wide his son asked what was funny. "Nothing, just something sweet," he said. Finally, one sunny afternoon, the hospital called. The twins' mother was ready to go home. The father offered to drive them, and the girls cheered with excitement. When they reached the hospital, the mother was waiting outside, dressed neatly though still a little weak. She hugged the twins for a long time, tears in her eyes again. "We have a home to go back to," she said softly. "But it's not the same one. The police helped us move to a safer place." The father nodded with relief. "That's good. A fresh start." Before leaving, the mother turned to him and said, "You've been like family to us. I'll never forget what you did," he smiled. "You don't need to thank me. Just take care of those two, and they're special." She nodded, looking at her daughters lovingly. "They are. and they'll always remember you." As they drove to the new house, the twins chatted excitedly about decorating their new room, about how they wanted to hang their drawings on the walls. The father couldn't stop smiling. When they arrived, the new house was small but clean and bright. Flowers grew in the front yard, and the air felt full of hope. The girls ran around exploring, laughing as if they'd just been given the world. The mother watched them and then looked at the father again. "You really changed our lives," she said softly. He looked at the girls playing and said, "Maybe they changed mine too." For a moment, neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. After helping them settle in, he waved goodbye and started walking back to his car. But before he could leave, the twins ran after him, each holding one of his hands. "Wait," Lucy said breathlessly. "Can you visit us too?" He smiled warmly. "Of course I can." They hugged him tightly, their little arms around his waist, and he felt his eyes sting just a little. He didn't expect any of this. He hadn't asked for it. But it had become one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. As he drove home that evening, he passed by his quiet neighborhood again. He looked at the houses, at the same door where everything had started, and thought about how a simple knock had changed everything. Some stories begin with grand events, but this one began with two small girls and a desperate plea for help, and somehow that night had brought light not just to their world but to his as well. He smiled quietly to himself as he turned the key in his front door. His son was waiting inside, ready to tell him about his day at school. The house felt warmer now, not just because of what happened, but because he knew deep in his heart that kindness had a way of finding its way back, and though he didn't know it yet, the bond between him, the twins, and their mother was only just beginning to grow into something beautiful, something that would stay in all their hearts for a lifetime. The days after the rescue felt different for everyone in the neighborhood. The story of what happened that night spread quietly, but people couldn't stop talking about how a simple, kind-hearted man stepped forward when everyone else froze. While most only heard about it from others, he had lived through every second of it, from the moment the twins knocked on his door to the moment their mother was carried away by the paramedics. But for him, life didn't just go back to normal. He couldn't stop thinking about the two little girls. He remembered their small, trembling hands clutching his sleeve, the fear in their eyes and the way they looked up at him with complete trust. They had no one else that night, and even though the authorities were now involved, something in his heart wouldn't let him rest until he knew they were safe. 3 days after the incident, there was another knock at his door. It was early morning, and he had just made breakfast for his son. When he opened the door, his heart almost skipped a beat. The two little girls stood there again, this time with a lady from Child Services. They both ran toward him before the lady could even speak, wrapping their small arms around his waist. "Can we stay here for a little?" one of them asked softly. "We don't like the place they took us." The lady explained that the twins had been temporarily placed in a shelter until their mother recovered. But the girls hadn't stopped crying since they got there. They kept asking for the kind man who helped Mama. He didn't have to think long. He looked at the social worker and simply said, "They can stay here for as long as needed." And that was how, for the first time in years, his small home filled with the sound of laughter again. At first, things were quiet. The girls were still shy, often sitting together in the corner holding hands wherever they went. His son, curious but gentle, tried to make them feel comfortable. He shared his toys, helped them with breakfast, and even gave them his favorite blanket when he saw they had trouble sleeping. Slowly, their fear began to fade. By the end of the first week, the three kids were inseparable. They built pillow forts, drew pictures on the kitchen table, and played outside in the yard until sunset. It had been a long time since the single dad had heard that kind of happiness in his home. At night, after the kids went to bed, he often found himself sitting quietly in the living room, thinking about how everything changed so quickly. He hadn't planned to take care of anyone else. He already had enough on his shoulders, balancing work, raising his son alone, and trying to make ends meet. But when he saw those little faces smiling in his home, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something good, something meant to happen. One afternoon, the phone rang. It was the twins' mother. Her voice was weak but filled with gratitude. She told him that she was slowly recovering in the hospital, and the doctor said she would be okay. But what she couldn't stop thinking about was how her daughters were safe because of him. "You saved us," she said. "I can never thank you enough. I thought I'd lost everything that night, but you gave me back my children." He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being called a hero, so he just replied softly, "You just focus on getting better. They're doing fine here." There was a pause on the other end, and then she said, "Please tell them I love them." After the call, he looked toward the living room, where the twins were coloring pictures. One of them looked up and smiled, showing him a crayon drawing. It was of a tall man holding two little girls' hands standing beside a small house with a heart on the roof. At the top, in uneven letters, they had written, "Our new friend." That small drawing nearly brought tears to his eyes. Weeks passed, and the twins began to feel completely at home. They helped set the table, cleaned up after playtime, and even learned to make pancakes with him on Sundays. His son had never been happier. It was as if he had suddenly gained two sisters. But it wasn't just the children who changed. The man himself began to feel something inside shift. For years he had lived quietly, working, cooking, cleaning, repeating the same routine every day. Since his wife's passing, he had forgotten what it felt like to laugh freely, to hear children's giggles echo through the house, or to come home to happy faces waiting at the door. Now every evening when he walked in from work, 3 little voices shouted his name at once, rushing to greet him. The sound of that joy was something he hadn't realized he missed so deeply. One evening, while the kids were playing in the yard, a few neighbors stopped by. Some came to thank him, others to ask what really happened that night. Everyone seemed to have heard a slightly different version of the story. He told them only the simple truth, that 2 frightened children came to his door, and he did what any decent person would do. But deep down, everyone knew not everyone would have done the same. After that day, people in the neighborhood started looking at him differently. Some would wave when he walked by. Others dropped off small gifts, clothes for the kids, food, even storybooks. It was as if his quiet act of kindness had reminded everyone that compassion still existed. One night, the girls were sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. One of them asked him softly, "Do you think our mama can see the stars from the hospital?" He smiled and said, "I think she can. And she's probably thinking about you right now." The little girl nodded. "When she comes home, can she stay with us too?" Her innocent question caught him off guard. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he didn't want to take away her hope. So he said, "Let's see what happens, okay? For now, she knows you're safe." When he went inside later, he saw the 3 kids asleep on the couch, curled up together like siblings. A soft smile spread across his face. Maybe they weren't related by blood, but something much stronger connected them now. Care, trust, and the comfort of being there for one another. A few days later, he got another call from the hospital. The mother's condition had improved, and she would be discharged soon. She wanted to meet him and personally thank him for everything he had done. When the day came, he drove the twins to the hospital. The moment they saw their mother, they ran into her arms, crying and laughing at the same time. The mother looked fragile but peaceful. She held her daughters tightly, whispering words only they could hear. Then she looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said, "You didn't just help that night. You gave us a chance to heal." He didn't say much, just nodded with a humble smile. It was hard for him to take credit for something that simply felt right to do. Before they left, the twins' mother placed a folded note in his hand. "Please read it later," she said. That evening, after tucking the kids into bed, he opened the note. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were a few simple lines. "I will never forget the man who opened his door when the world turned its back on me. You showed my daughters that kindness still exists. When I'm stronger, I want to build a life where they can grow up feeling safe, the way you made them feel. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." He folded the note carefully and placed it in a small box on the shelf. It wasn't just a thank you letter. It was a reminder of how one act of compassion could change everything. From that day on, he realized something profound. Sometimes life tests you not to show your weaknesses, but to reveal your strength. The night those little girls knocked on his door, he thought he was helping them. But in truth, they had helped him too. They reminded him that love can find its way into your home in the most unexpected moments, that even after the darkest nights, kindness can still light the way. And as he stood by the window that night, watching the quiet street under the stars, he knew in his heart that his home, once filled with silence, had found its laughter again. Time passed quietly after the mother came home from the hospital. The single dad's house, which had become the girls' temporary shelter, slowly went back to its calm routine, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Something about that short time together had changed him and everyone involved. The twins' mother had recovered enough to move into a small apartment a few streets away. The social worker had helped her find a safe place, and some kind neighbors even pitched in with furniture and food. But before she left the hospital, she made one thing clear. She didn't want to disappear from the lives of the people who saved her and her daughters. The first evening after she settled in, she stopped by the single dad's house with her daughters. She looked healthier now, a bit tired but standing tall with quiet strength. The twins rushed inside without hesitation as if the house still belonged to them. They hugged his son, ran around the kitchen and asked what was for dinner. The single dad laughed softly. "It looks like you never left," he said. The mother smiled. "They've been talking about you every day," she said. "I think they missed this place more than they missed their toys." From that day on, visiting became a part of their routine. Sometimes the girls would spend the afternoon there while their mother went for job interviews. Other times the mother would come along with homemade food as a thank you gesture. Slowly, what started as an act of kindness turned into something more, a friendship that felt like family. One weekend, the five of them went to the nearby park together. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and the air was filled with the sounds of children playing and the scent of blooming flowers. The twins chased butterflies while his son tried to build a kite from sticks and paper. The two adults sat on a bench watching them with quiet smiles. "I don't know how to repay you," she said softly, watching her daughters run around. "Every time I see them laugh, I remember that night. I can't even imagine what would have happened if you hadn't opened your door." He shook his head gently. "You don't have to repay anything. I just did what anyone should do." She looked at him for a moment and said, "No, not everyone would have done it." There was a long pause. The wind rustled through the trees and the sound of the children's laughter filled the silence. He didn't say anything more, but deep inside he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Over the following months, their connection grew stronger. The twins often called him uncle, and his son began calling their mother auntie. They celebrated birthdays together, cooked meals as a group, and sometimes even helped each other with errands. It wasn't a planned arrangement. It just felt natural. For years, he had lived quietly, thinking his life's purpose was only to raise his son and keep things simple. But now, seeing how his small act of kindness had rippled out and changed so many lives, he realized something beautiful. Sometimes the family we build is not through blood but through compassion. One evening, as autumn settled in and the evenings grew cooler, the twins came over holding a small box. They placed it on his kitchen table with shy smiles. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," one of them said eagerly. Inside was a framed photo. It showed him, his son, the twins, and their mother at the park, all smiling under the sunlight. Around the frame, the girls had glued small pieces of paper with words written in crayon. "Thank you for our new life." He stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't an expensive gift, but to him it meant more than anything money could buy. That night, after everyone left, he hung the picture on the wall in his living room. For the first time in years, he felt like his house was complete again. Not just a place to live, but a place filled with love, laughter, and new beginnings. As weeks passed, the twins' mother found a steady job at a local bakery. She would often bring over fresh bread and pastries after work, insisting that he and his son should be the first to taste them. On weekends, they would take walks together, talk about life, and sometimes just sit quietly while the kids played nearby. There was no rush, no big promises, no dramatic moments, just small, honest gestures that slowly built something meaningful. One winter evening, snow began to fall softly outside. The twins and his son were sitting near the heater, making paper snowflakes and hanging them around the house. The mother helped him prepare dinner, warm soup, bread, and tea. The air smelled of comfort and home. At one point, she looked around the room and said quietly, "You know, my girls used to be scared of the dark. Every night they would cry and ask me to keep the lights on. But after staying here, they don't cry anymore. They tell me that you taught them not to be afraid, that good people still exist." He smiled faintly, stirring the soup. "Maybe they taught me the same thing," he said. The mother looked at him, her eyes soft. She knew what he meant. He had lost a lot in his own life, a partner, stability, peace. But somehow, through helping her and her daughters, he had found healing too. That night when they all sat down to eat, it didn't feel like two families sharing dinner. It felt like one. The kids talked over each other, laughing, sharing stories from school and occasionally spilling food on the table. The adults just watched them with quiet amusement, knowing moments like these were worth more than anything. As time went on, their friendship became something the whole neighborhood admired. People often said they were brought together by a miracle. But he didn't believe it was a miracle. It was simply the result of choosing kindness when it mattered most. Months turned into a year, and life continued peacefully. The twins grew taller, their laughter louder. The mother's strength returned fully, and she began helping others in her own way, volunteering at a local shelter, donating small items, and comforting women going through hard times. Whenever someone asked what inspired her, she would smile and say, "A stranger who opened his door." On the anniversary of the night everything began. The twins and their mother invited him and his son over for dinner. The small apartment was warm and cozy, decorated with string lights and candles. On the table sat a homemade cake with words written in icing, "Thank you for being our family." After dinner, the twins handed him another note, a small envelope this time. Inside, written in their neat handwriting, were the words, "We came to your door scared and crying. You opened it without asking who we were. You saved Mama, you saved us, and you showed us love when we had none. You are part of our story forever." He didn't speak for a while. The room was quiet except for the crackling sound of the heater. Then he looked at them, his voice soft but full of emotion. "You girls saved me too," he said. "You reminded me that there's always a reason to open the door." The twins ran to him, wrapping their arms around him tightly. Their mother stood nearby, tears in her eyes, smiling through them. His son joined in too, and for a moment they all stood there. No words, just warmth. Later that night, as he walked home with his son, the streetlights glowed softly on the snow. His son looked up at him and said, "Dad, I think Mom would be happy. You helped someone just like she used to." He placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "I think you're right," he said quietly. When they reached home, he looked at the photo on the wall, the one from the park, and smiled. Life had come full circle. What began as a desperate knock on the door had turned into a story of hope, healing, and unexpected family. Sometimes, he thought, we spend so much time waiting for good things to happen that we forget we can be the good thing for someone else. That night, when he chose to open his door, he didn't just save lives. He opened his heart to something bigger than himself. And as he turned off the lights and looked out the window one last time, he whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Not for the past or the future, but for that single moment that changed everything. Because sometimes, one act of kindness is enough to turn strangers into family, and darkness into light.